Hello, Donna McGeorge. How are you?
Judy, Donna. I'm awesome.
Oh my God. I've always loved getting you on this podcast. Everyone loves our conversations. But the reason why I'm super excited about our podcast today is I've had a little bit of an inside preview into the latest bit of genius writing from you, your brand new book, Red Brick Thinking. And I think it's the very thing that so many of our listeners need right now, whether they are working in organizations or they're running their own show. This book is just a game changer. So I wanted to get you on because I want to talk to you about your book, and I want to give my listeners the inside scoop on everything that this book is all about. So thank you for gifting me your time, because I know you're a very busy woman and you're in demand. You're talking on stages all over the place. So thank you for finding some time for our listeners.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So let's jump into it. So red brick thinking, right? It's become a word. Well, it's become a phrase that I'm using. Some people in our world are using quite regularly because you've been bombarding us with it for a number of months now. So it's become like the vernacular. But for those people that I might go, what the hell are you two talking about? Come on, throw it at us. What is this book all about, and why? From your perspective, did you have to write this book? Because it's a bit of a shift from what you've done previously. I mean, there's an anchor there. There's a reason behind it that leads to your other stuff. But this is such a different book for you, which is why I'm so excited. Tell me more.
Yeah. So just a little bit of history. Originally, I was meant to be writing the fourth book in the It's About Time series, which is my meetings and one-day refund, all of that stuff. And then partway through writing that, it's like genius descended on me, and it's not like this was a new idea. It was the same idea I've been having nearly my whole career and whole life, but it just crystallized into one kind of thought. So when I wrote the one-day refund, I was doing a lot of research into how do we create more space and capacity for ourselves. And I stumbled across this study done out of the University of Virginia in the US that talked about something called addition bias, where when we're presented with a problem, our instinct is to add. And so how this looks in workplaces is we've got a problem, let's add a policy, procedure, meetings, committee. We just add a bunch of things to try and solve the problem. How it looks in small business is I have a problem. Well, I better get another product, get onto social media, do more to see if that creates change. And it resulted in me running a little exercise that I'd do in workshops where I had a little Lego bridge and one leg was longer than the other, and I'd give people a few extra bricks and I'd say, how would you fix this? And right on cue, people would just start adding bricks because that's how you solve problems. But the longer leg that was making it crooked had a little red brick at the bottom. And very few people thought about taking the red brick away. And that was the genesis of red brick thinking, which is when we're presented with a problem, we ask first, is there something I could remove that could also solve the problem? And so then I labeled it red brick thinking, and then the whole world exploded around this idea of red brick thinking. And so, yeah, interesting conversation with my publisher that was, I think I want to write a different book. And it's literally due out any second. So that's how it came about.
I love that story I've heard you share from stage about, I think it's the Swan, is it the Swan Match Company?
Yes, Swan Vesters. Yeah.
That's the one. Can you share that one?
Sure. So Swan Vesters is a European match company. They were originally British, and then I think the Swedes bought them out a few years back. But back in the 60s, they used to have two striking strips on each side of the matches, or sorry, a strip on each side of the matchbox. Apparently back then people were very dedicated to being able to strike a match from any position. And some bright spark, pardon the pun, says, what would happen? Do we need two striking strips? What would happen if we removed one? And so the company was like, oh, gee, that's a good idea. So they removed one of the striking strips off the matchbox. And of course, nothing happened. No customers complained. In fact, people didn't even notice. The majority of people just assumed there was never two strips and just thought they were going a bit nuts. But the only thing that happened is the organisation saved tons of money. And so the lesson out of this story, which I also love, is what's the striking strip in your life that if you removed it, no one would even notice? And my own personal experience of this is, I used to think that I had to post social media every day, and people got very used to seeing me do my little teacup chronicles. And so I started to think, I wonder what would happen if I only did a teacup chronicle once a week or once a fortnight or once a month. And guess what? No one's noticed. No one's complained. When I do one, they're all for it. And so that was an example of me taking the pressure off myself and removing that strip or removing that red brick in a way that no one noticed, right?
Absolutely. Why do you think that it's such because it's a simple idea, but a really powerful idea in terms of, as you're talking about it, I'm going, that makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. We add things to more apps to our phone. We're constantly seeing new things online and we go and chase that. We're always adding. So it makes absolute sense, this idea that you're sharing about red brick, think your business. You talk about your life, your decision making, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a simple idea. And yet at the same time, people aren't doing it. Why do you think that this book is so needed right now?
We're living in an era more than ever of more, that we just keep adding more. I see it when I do work with organizations around strategic planning, that we go off-site, we fill up our walls with flip charts full of great initiatives, and no one ever says, what are we going to stop doing to make room for this? The poor old Teamsters, there's a presentation, here's only a strategic plan, and everyone goes, that's just piling on more work for me. This instinct is nearly hardwired into us. I mean, you've done it, I've done it, we've all gone down the street to get a carton of milk and we come back with 3 bags of groceries and a kayak, particularly if we've been to Aldi's, right? That middle aisle in Aldi's gets us every single time. It's almost like we cannot not do it. And so the alternative is to pause, ask the question, is there a red brick we can remove? And the technical term for this is strategic subtraction, is that it now has to be part of how we think about the world, as well as much as we do strategic addition and planning and creation. We've got to start thinking about what can we stop doing. And it's really hard. No one gets Employee of the Month award for saying, hey, I reckon we should stop some stuff, right? No one gets that. So it's part of systemically how we do the world. Now, the reason for this book and the reason this is so important is we are in an epidemic of burnout. We're in an epidemic of mental health crisis. People are overwhelmed, overworked, and over it. And unless we can figure out ways for people to have more space and capacity, they're not going to be able to sustain it more than ever right now.
Yeah. And what I love about your thinking around this is it's not just from the productivity space or the workspace. You even talk in your book about, the generational piece or the cultural piece, like this, all the stuff, all the baggage that we are carrying. You're suggesting that we actually need to start red bricking various parts of our life to create that space to be able to move forward. Can you share a little bit more about that?
So I reckon we all walk around with an invisible backpack and it's carrying stuff. Some people call it baggage, whatever you want to call it. So mine is already got resentment at 3 meetings yesterday that should have been an email, or, I'm carrying around an intention to read War and Peace that I've been carrying for 10 years worth of vacations, or I'm irritated at the person who invented Reply All. So I'm carrying that, and that's heavy. I'm also carrying things like guilt, grudges, obligations that we just build up over time. And sometimes they're from routines and rituals and habits that we've been doing our whole life, which, let's face it, could take 10 years of therapy to unravel. But often, particularly if anyone's listening who might be an oldest child, oldest daughter, only child, you'll know that you have a weight of obligation for, you contracted for stuff that you never realized you contracted for. And so when people would ask me about, I was feeling so overwhelmed, I'm like, well, what are you carrying in your head? What's the stuff that you're constantly thinking about? And And a lot of it, yeah, there was some work stuff, meetings I've got to do, projects I have to do, stuff like that. But holy cow, there was a whole bunch of it that's just either emotional red bricks or cultural red bricks, which are so emotional are the grudges, the guilts, the things that we just carry, sometimes relationships. And then there's the cultural ones, which is the way it's always been done, the cultural mores that we just go along with, that we never question. And then the structural ones that sit a lot in organizations around the systems, processes, policies, all that sort of stuff, that they're so embedded that it takes real courage to identify and remove one, right? Because you're going to ask a hard question. So it's not just, strategically subtract a meeting or say no to an invitation. Red bricks are everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely, everywhere. And knowing you research the bejesus out of your content. So what I love about your writing, Donna, it's not in my language a whole load of brain farts. There's the depth, the research, the evidence behind it. And I know, because I've been fortunate enough to have a opportunity to read a preview of this. There's so many awesome stories in there. What are a couple of your favorites that, in your mind, justify, explain, give the evidence as to why this concept of why red brick thinking needs to become something we all do? Where's the evidence?
Well, most of it, a lot of it comes from my personal experience working and coaching clients, right? Where, for example, a woman came into an organization, she inherited a team, she inherited meeting cadences, she inherited policies and procedures. And there was one meeting that she would have every week. It was a 2-hour kind of whip meeting. But she noticed people had all their cameras turned off, that they'd only chime in when they felt like it was relevant to them or it was their turn to speak. And so she asked, what's the value of this meeting? And no one could explain that to her. They couldn't figure it out. None of them thought it was interesting. So she said, well, let's just stop it. Let's just stop the meeting. And she said, but I'm not taking it out of your diaries. I'm going to leave it in your diaries because I want to leave that 2 hours a week in your diary for you to focus on things that our future selves will thank us for. Give us some space and capacity to think beyond just the always urgent and always proximate that is the normal working life. And it's a bit of a Cinderella story because they ended up solving a massive problem that had been around on a product for a long time, and they turned a product around, and it was, she says to this day, you'll never convince me. So that's a little bit of anecdotal evidence, if you will. But there's piles of evidence that say when people have space and capacity to think, whether you're, in fact, rocket scientist, Einstein's been talking about it for years, giving himself some space and capacity. So they give themselves 15 to 20% of their week to just daydream. In fact, the new research around daydreaming and boredom is fascinating, and the connections they're making to mental health issues. So, and you all know this, when we get bored, our brain wanders, our mind wanders, and it starts asking great questions, like as deep as meaning of life and as shallow as what's for dinner, right? But it starts asking deep questions. And this particular study hypothesized that if we don't start making space and get used to boredom again, this is going to cause even more mental health issues because we're not giving ourselves a chance to ask ourselves important questions. And so there's a lot of studies that show, and most of my work has always been around creating space and capacity, why we need to remove things from our world so we have the space for the important stuff.
And what I mean, just even that concept space, it's interesting when you and I have quite a few people that we hang around with together, and we talk a lot about big picture thinking, etc. And that the interesting thing when it comes to space is the counterintuitive that I'm noticing is people are filling, like you've said, filling the space. It could be they're going away and they want to see the agenda by the hour, or, you're running a workshop and what does it look like by the second? And yet you and I have both experienced the opportunity that exists when you actually create space for conversation, space to actually question. And again, what I love about Red Brick Thinking, your book, it's almost a book for everyone. And you've written this book so differently. Anyone that knows your work your work traditionally is a teaching style book, but you've written this, it's almost like a call to arms. It's like, come on, if you want to change things, start taking some ownership, and here's how. And you've got different elements of it. Can you just share with our listeners a little bit more about how you've structured? I'm talking about that back end of the book when you're talking about the different ways of
Yeah. So just kind of to touch on the thing about space, years ago I facilitated an offsite. It was a 2-day, and one of the afternoon sessions before the big dinner that they always do on a 2-day offsite, and there was probably about 30 or 40 people at this one. I blocked it out and said it's game time. And they thought I was going to do some kind of metaphoric game where you end up, what's the leadership lesson in it all? And I said, no, I wheeled in a trolley full of board games and footies and tennis rackets and stuff, and said, I want you to go and spend 3 hours with your colleagues just hanging out together and use the board games as a way. Anyway, people said it changed them up. They never make space for that. And it was like, the reason we need to do that is we fill these agendas. I reckon red bricking agendas is a absolute critical thing we could do. So that kind of leads me into the way the book was structured. I really wanted to move away from what one of my constant readers and fans, he didn't realize what he was saying, but he said, I love Donna's books because they're tip books. And I thought, oh, gee, I think that's minimizing them a bit. However, he was probably bang on because they are like little training manuals in a book. For me, this time it was like, this is a manifesto. This is a movement. This is something way more meaningful, and it sits this is above productivity. This is not a productivity piece. This is how do we fundamentally shift our way of thinking, about ourselves. And so it's the 3 main sections there's one section that's talking about the red brick revelation, which is the moment that we realize that removing the red brick on the little bridge, that aha moment, And I talk in there about agency, and I talk about attachment, which are 2 key aspects of why we keep accumulating stuff. And actually, it's increased attachment and lack of agency is probably to be more meaningful. And then the middle part of the book are those 3 kind of areas of different types of red bricks. So emotional, cultural, and structural. So emotional are things like obligation and relationships. Cultural more fell into that category. Stimulation, that, we can't sit for 5 minutes without, reaching for a phone. And structural are all the systems and processes and stuff. So the second section is there's 15 different types. Now, there's probably way more than that, but we did 15 for the book. In fact, one of the chapters we had to ditch was a really good one on, oh, gee, I wish I could remember that now. Anyway, it'll come to me later.
Oh, you've red bricked it.
I red bricked it. Well, I do that. I actually do that because, the human mind's for having ideas, not storing them. It's all written down, so I don't need the remembering it. So there we go. And then the third part of the book is about the red brick revolution, which is the actions we need to take. So spotting your red bricks, questioning why we had them in the first place, removing them, then feeling what it's like when you let go of stuff, and then talking about it, sharing it with others.
I have no doubt there's people listening going, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I need. And of course, you're going to go and buy the book. But I'm also imagining many people listening, okay, how, which is that final bit there. Could you expand a little bit on that last
little bit?
Yeah, and even if you've got an example, hey?
Yeah. How do you spot them? So if you're working in an organization, it's like you can spot them by how you feel, right? So there's something you're about to do, and you're like, your shoulders drop and your eyes roll, and you've got a big sigh. And it's not because you don't like doing it, but the chances are you're like, I don't even know why we do this anymore. Why do we have to do this report? Why do we have to have this meeting? Why do I play this role? In some way, shape, or format. And so the first step is to just pay attention to your state. Now, another way to recognize how to spot them is to go to the person who's been in your organization, if you work in a big organization, who's been there 3 months or less, and go and ask them, what are they bewildered by? You know, what do we do that you go, I wonder why they do it this way? Because they're probably red bricks hiding in plain sight for you, right? So I reckon there's right now, if you went into your calendar, there's probably half a dozen red bricks just in meetings alone. But I don't want to minimize it by saying it's only meetings. Sometimes it's projects, you know, zombie projects that wander around organizations just sucking people's brains out, right? So why do we keep doing it? The sunk cost fallacy comes into it, right? We've already invested this much money. We should continue, right? So these are the questions. So Atlassian, they do every year, they retire or graduate projects. So people are allowed to nominate projects that they don't think are adding any more value or didn't do what we hoped that they would do. I wish more companies would do this. And so they then are nominated for quitting, because then that makes space for more. I have heard organizations do zombie project amnesties where you can nominate projects. So the first thing we got to do is spot them and have a culture where it's okay to spot them, because the next part is we've spotted what we think could be a red brick. Now let's ask the questions. Why do we do it in the first place? What was the original intention behind this? Is it still giving us what we thought it would? Would anyone notice if it went away? Right? Will anyone actually notice? And so let's answer those questions, because it's not just about willy-nilly getting rid of stuff that I don't like doing, or it's not about that. It's really about, does it add value? And so then we remove it. And, you know, a lot of people get very nervous in organizations stopping things and removing things. And they, you know, the fear around that is very high. And it's mostly the fear that someone's going to notice or complain or whatever. But I promise you, no one's going to die if you stop a project or get rid of an initiative that wasn't working. And the real trick is to actually get rid of it, not just pause it or not just maybe. It's just like completely get rid of it and get it off people's agendas straight up. And then that creates the space for people to notice the difference and then use the time for things that are adding more value. Now, you know, please, if you're listening to this, I want you to apply all the usual safety, regulatory, government requirements, all the things that you have to do because you have to do them. I mean, wouldn't we all just love to go and red brick a few government departments just quietly? But you still have to do some things, right? I can't just red brick doing GST because I don't like doing GST. And it absolutely makes me roll my eyes every month to do the BAS and slump my shoulders and all that. But I can red brick it in the sense that I can outsource it to someone who loves it, right? And so in a small business, there's a great question to ask, what's consuming all your time? So there's another way to spot it. What are you spending too much time doing that an expert could do? Now, of course, there's often a cost associated with that, but what would happen if you outsourced it? What would it free you up to do? But I think one of the biggest things that people overlook with this is the feeling it. Take a moment to feel what it was like to let that go, to feel the weight drop off your shoulders, to drop that backpack, to be lighter. Yeah? Feel and kind of relish that. And then, of course, because they're creating a revolution, spread the word. Get more people using it. Use it as a verb. How to red brick. We need to red brick this. What could you red brick? I red brick this today. Red brick, red brick, red brick. Blah, blah, blah.
Do you reckon you can use this concept in your own life too?
My personal life?
In anyone listening. So it's not just work, is it? You
God,
use
no.
It. Yeah.
No. Think about your weekends and the amount of times you get to 4 o'clock on a Sunday and your weekend starts because you've either had a bunch of family obligations, you've got kids doing sport, you've suddenly got to clean the house because you're flat out all week. And so there's aspects of our personal life that are easy. In fact, most of our emotional red bricks, the guilt, the obligations, the grudges, the roles, responsibilities, and things that we take on, they're mostly in our personal life. And so I have plenty of conversations with my coaching clients who talk about their weekends. They never get a break. You know, someone always wants a piece of them. It's like you've got to start negotiating with your kids, mates, families around you drop them off at soccer, I'll pick them up, right? Now, if you love watching your kids play sport, that's completely different. That if it is causing the angst and you don't want to go every weekend to Nana's for a bait dinner, right? But somehow, or every time there's a family gathering, everyone expects you to bring your homemade brownies. It's like, well, why wouldn't you red bricks? And I did that with a client, actually. I said, that's a literal story where she said, oh, God, and every time I go to one of these family things, I've got to take my brownies and they take me hours to make. I'm like, why don't you just go buy them? No one will even notice. In fact, they might even like them better. So just so stick them in the same old container that you always take them in, but just pick them up at Woolies on your way home and just take them. She said no one noticed. No one noticed they weren't her homemade brownies.
That's what I used to do when the kids were at primary school. I remember we've got a client that you and I both know, and she is the only daughter in a family of boys, and she used to share her frustration with me every Christmas because the expectation was that she and her mom would be in the kitchen doing all the cleaning. And little did she know, because this would have been like 3 years ago, I'm not doing it anymore. So she red brick Christmas, and she went, I'm not doing it. If you want me to come over, I'm turning up with my kids. I'll bring this one plate. Everyone else bring a plate, and everyone's going to be allocated a cleaning up duty. And it's exactly now I'm thinking about it, she red bricked Christmas.
She red bricked Christmas. And the thing about that sort of stuff is, when did that start? Now, unfortunately, it's a bit gender related that, let's make a cup of tea and everyone looks at the woman in the room to put the kettle on and, right? So there is a bit of gender stuff there, but there's an obligation there that I'm curious about. And, we had a similar thing with Christmas, that it was just expected that you would all get together always for Christmas. Now, we were a bit better about certain roles. We shared the load a little bit more. But I didn't want to have that. So I remember we started just going on holidays for Christmas, and we literally would go to Fiji for Christmas Day. And the first couple of times we did it, we had such pushback from the family. How could you do that? You'll be lonely. You'll regret it. It's like, no way, sitting, sucking cocktails by the pool on Christmas afternoon was fantastic. And so much so that when Emma, my daughter, we started having the conversations around what's happening with Christmas, I said, I never want you to feel obliged that you have to come to us. If Kim's family has more attachment to it, we're not that attached. We'll see you at some point. So when we've tried really hard not to repeat the next generation of obligation, it's so heavy, the red brick of obligation, so heavy.
It is. Do you think that obligation is because people are just finding it? Is it in the business of life that where it's easier to add versus to subtract? It's easier to say yes versus say no? It comes back a little bit to what you were talking about at the beginning of actually we need space to think and make decisions. And again, I'm feeling and sensing this isn't just for us as individuals, whether it be family, life, business, but I'm also seeing it bigger scale. You can take this up to country, global level, that we need to actually just start red bricking instead of adding, and not being able to find solutions. But it requires that space to be able to determine what we're stopping doing.
It always seems to come back to space for me, because how do I know what to red brick if I'm not giving myself the space to contemplate what needs red bricking? I mean, I red bricked the news years ago because I was sick of watching all the palaver on telly. And, so that does that put me in a bit of denial? Maybe, but my life is much more peaceful without it, and it gives me space to think about other things. But I mean, it's straight up a classic government thing that we have a problem, we need a policy, and often with a policy comes potentially a whole new department to solve the problem of when, what could we remove? So I often think I think they did a great job, a great couple of examples of government policy where they red bricked was in Melbourne, the tram system, the amount of fare evaders who were in the city because they were either visitors or they'd come out from work and they'd left their card or whatever. It was very difficult to buy tickets. And so rather than continuing to fine and adding more, conductors on to fine you for not having your ticket, they said, well, what if we just removed the need to pay in the CBD? And so they created the free tram zone. And the level of fare, there's still always going to be fare evaders, but for the most part, people are honest and they tap on and tap off if they're outside of the free tram zone. But it changed how people use that amazing public transport system. So, yeah, I'm always really curious about, things like legalizing marijuana. I'm not necessarily saying we should all go out and smoke pot or anything like that, but the amount of effort and energy that's put into policing stuff, that if it wasn't illegal, how much difference would that make, right? So
that's that questioning piece, isn't it? So what is your ultimate wish for this book? What is your hope for this book?
I'd love the concept. If the book does this, that's great. But really, it's about how do I touch the lives of the most amount of people with this idea, really. So I think this is, to quote Ted, I think this is an idea worth spreading. I think the more people that know about it, the better. If I touched 1 million lives with this, knowing that each of those 1 million people could then touch more lives, that would just be amazing. And of course, I would love the book to sell. That goes without saying. But for me, it's like we've got to start doing something fundamentally different, because we can't keep going on the way we are. It's just not sustainable at so many levels. I'd love to see it in the vernacular where people start, you see online, oh, I red bricked this today, or you're hearing it in organisations saying, I think we need to have a red brick meeting because we've got a lot on and we've got to figure out what to red brick in the next quarter so that we can focus on XYZ. I'd love to see that.
Well, if anything of looking at the evidence of how this is starting to show up online, how it's starting to show up in the mutual contacts, colleagues that we have, where I've just red bricked that, it's becoming part of the vernacular. I don't think it's going to be that much of an impossible feat that this does become a part of it. Now, we're going to put in the show notes how to find you. Anyone listening here, highly recommend you check out Donna McGeorge online on LinkedIn and her website. All of the details are there in terms of how to grab a copy of this book, how to get Donna into your organizations to support and help red brick the thinking in your organizations, as well as really starting to potentially speak to your teams about how to take ownership and red brick to fundamentally get more momentum happening throughout. Any final words, Donna, for our listeners?
Look, I think my final word is often the same in just about all the conversations I have with people, is that red bricking is a future self activity, right? So the things that you red brick now mean that your future self will thank you, or your future self is that much better. So sometimes we red brick stuff and we think, I don't know that I'm going to get the benefits of this right away. But actually, the more you pay attention to red bricking things and some of the decisions that you make about what you red brick today means that your future self is going to be so much better off than they are now if you do.
Yeah, and isn't that what we want? As you say, do the things now that your future self will thank you for. Something that Donna taught me years ago, something that I make decisions with now, and now I'm overlaying the red brick thinking. What could possibly go wrong? It's apart from lots of awesome space to be able to create magic. Donna McGeorge, good luck, although I don't think you need it with this book. I know it's going to be a bestseller. I know it's going to change a lot of people's personal lives, but also professionally, how they pursue their career or business goals. I can't wait to see it on shelf. For those of you that are watching this on YouTube, you can, in the background, see the cover of Red Brick Thinking, and we will absolutely put links in the show notes so that you can be one of the first to grab a copy. I don't think you're going to be able to avoid it. It's going to be absolutely everywhere. Donna McGeorge, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your genius with the world. And thank you for just giving us this time today to enable me through my little portion of the world to support the people that are following me. You are amazing and can't wait. Congratulations on what is going to be a bestseller.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My absolute pleasure.